the second one was in 2013, when the Dulwich Society was researching the history of what was known as the Toxoa Hotel or Toxoa House. And that was on Dulwich Common. It's now a gated residential development. We'll show you a photograph of that later on. And in the course of finding out about this, one of our members, Tony Corris, actually produced the article, but I was also looking through, and one day I just Googled Toxoa Hotel and Dulwich, and up came an entry from the London Gazette, which was actually saying that there had been, I think, 2 patents taken out with the Patent Office, and they were registering the patents, and they were for concrete railway sleepers. So that wasn't very, very exciting. But I looked a bit further and found some names. And one of the names I found was, when I explored this person, was absolutely riveting, amazing. So I will come to that person in due course. Now, the second incident, if you like, occurred when I went, we're fiddling with some technical things here, we're trying to get the picture. When I went with my wife to visit our daughter, who was teaching, in all places, in Patagonia. And we were down in a town, city called Punta Arenas, right down the bottom of Chile. And we were just opposite, across the straits, looking at Tierra del Fuego. And one day we decided we would like to visit Tierra del Fuego. So we went there for a day trip, because it's very, very close. And I was amazed to find a signpost. On the signpost, it gave the mileage to various places in Europe, including Yugoslavia. And it gave the actual mileage. And I thought, why on earth would it want to give the mileage from the Tierra del Fuego to Yugoslavia? And then I had to go into a bank to change some money. And the bank clerk, her name badge was Yugoslavian. It was in Serbo-Croat. And I wondered why. And then we go on one more. Then I went, in fact, to Croatia about 5 years ago on holiday, and I'm sure you've been as well, and looked at the waterfalls and so on. And I found, with more research into these things, that there had been a diaspora. Can we go back? Can we go back one? Thank you. Of Croatians that were leaving Croatia, and they were emigrating to, well, you can see where they were going. Chile, 200,000. And look at Argentina, 400,000. And the USA, 1.2 million. And that's how many of these Croatians there are in these particular countries. And they went because of oppression by the Serbs up until the First World War and after the First World War. And in fact, even now, Croatia is still the second highest country for emigration. We go one. So here we have the map of Croatia. You can see that's in yellow. And it was formed after the Great War. It was formed out of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and these 6 states were amalgamated into Yugoslavia. Serbia had the upper hand, if you like. They were the most forceful and powerful. Forward one. And here you see the same map of Yugoslavia with the religious divide, and the ones in blue are Catholic And the ones in the mauve color are Orthodox. Even the language, although they speak the same language pretty closely, the written language is different. So the blue, the Croatian, Bosnian, will be in the Latin alphabet, and the Serbians will be in the Cyrillic alphabet in the Eastern. You've got a few dark green ones there, which are the Muslim areas. Thank you. So this will all make sense later. Stick with me if you will. And then we were also, and I was also looking at fascism in Dulwich, and you may have heard my previous talks. I had looked at the history of William Joyce, Lord Haw-Haw, as you probably know, made speeches from the corner of Carlton Avenue and Dulwich Village on a Saturday morning, standing on a soapbox. And so the Nazi Party of Britain started in Dulwich. It wasn't formed here, it was formed in Westminster, in a pub in Westminster, but it operated out of Dulwich from the Joyce household. And the Joyce family lived in Allison Grove, but when William Joyce married, he moved to Farquhar Road up near Crystal Palace. When I was looking at the story of William Joyce and his files in the Public Record Office, I also came across his brother Quentin. And Quentin was only a youngster. He was the treasurer of the party, and he was only about 21 when he was arrested at the outbreak of World War II. Just about 3 days after the outbreak. He should have been picked up earlier because he worked for the Air Ministry as a civilian clerk. But he was accused of spying for Germany, and MI5 had been following him for some time. But I won't go into that again. So I want you to remember Quentin Joyce, because his name is going to show up again in a moment. And the Allison Grove, this is where the Joyce family lived, on the left-hand side at number 7 Allison Grove. It was one of the first houses, or the first house, to be bombed in World War II, which of course was very appropriate, we all thought, in Dulwich. That's on the right is what it looks like today. And then there's the third element of this, which is Glenlee. And Glenlee is 70 metres from Allison Grove and another 70 metres from the Toxoa Hotel. And Glenlee was the home for the Dutch Secret Service in World War II. And there, young Dutchmen were trained in wireless transmission, small arms warfare. And you possibly heard this story before. They were parachuted into German-occupied Holland between 1943 and 1945. So let's get back to the Toxoa Hotel. Well, the Toxoa Hotel is one corner of this spy corner. So we've got spies, if you like, in Allison Grove. 70 metres away, we've got Dutch spies and agents at Glenlee. And then at the Toxoa Hotel, we've got a Nazi manager called Stuart Cole. And there's a new resident at the Toxoa Hotel in December 1945. And this is the new resident. His name is Branimir Jelic. He is the man who applied for the patents for the concrete railway sleepers. He was a Croatian nationalist. As a student at the University of Zagreb, he founds the great Croat youth movement. And in 1926, a man called Ante Pavelic, who was founder of the Stasi, the Croatian ultranationalist terrorist organization, was invited by the 21-year-old Jelic into the organization. Now, Pavelic had already founded the Stasi. There were training camps for it in Italy. They were convinced the population of Bosnia, which was the idea, which because Bosnia was made up of Serbs, Muslims, and about 18% Croat, it was to use terror to persuade waverers to join in the movement for the freedom of Croatia away from Yugoslavia. So in January 1929, King Alexander of Yugoslavia, he banned all these national parties. So he banned Jelic, who was exiled, as was Pavelic. Jelic went to university in Austria, trained to become a doctor, specialized in plastic surgery, and he established a successful practice in Berlin. Now, when I went 5 years ago on my trip to Croatia, we had a very good guide to take us around some of the sites. And I mentioned to him, I said, have you ever heard of Branimir Jelic? And he looked at me absolutely thunderstruck. How had I heard of Branimir Jelic? And I explained a little bit about it. And of course, now Branimir Jelic is a national hero. And there's a statue to him, as you can see there on the right-hand side, in his home village, which is in a place, Donji Dolak, which is near the Hungarian border. So in 1932, Jelic goes to South America to organize support for the Ustasi. He's working closely with Pavelic. And so the Ustasi, as I said, is the Croatian ultra-nationalist terrorist organization. He spends about a year there in South America, mainly in Argentina, but in other countries, Paraguay, Chile. In 1934, he goes to the USA to raise funds again. And we know now that there are 1.2 million Croats in the USA, many of them living in the Chicago area and quite a lot in New York. While he is there, he's implicated in the assassination of Alexander, King of Yugoslavia. In 1913, then after he's done his 4 months fundraising in America, he returns to Berlin and continues his practice, but also continues in dialogue with the Ustasi. In 1939, he returns to the USA, and there he is denied entry. He's locked up on Ellis Island. And if you know Ellis Island, you've been to New York, you know, it's that island out in the middle of the Sound there. And he's kept there. And he's kept there for some months. And then, despite all his protestations, he is denied entry. And in 1939, he decides, or he announces, that he's going to Italy. The FBI tip off the British of Jelic's departure from the USA. En route to his destination in Italy, where he's suspected of going to assassinate the Prince Regent of Yugoslavia in order to destabilize Yugoslavia so that Croatia could have independence. On his way on this ship, which is called an Italian ship, I mean, Italy is not in the war at this point, so it's an Italian ship traveling in neutral waters. A British destroyer from Gibraltar intercepts the Italian liner, and Jelic is taken off the liner and taken and imprisoned in Gibraltar. MI5, he's there for 6 months. MI5 describe him. Jelic is 6 feet 5 inches tall. Jelic is a magnificent specimen of a man, very attractive. and apparently very open, but obviously not telling the truth, either in his relations with the Stasi or the Gestapo. And so here we see on the left, the Italian liner, neutral Italy, in neutral waters, being taken and stopped by a British destroyer. Now, the man that he's in partnership with, Ante Pavelic, is, as I said, the founder of this Stasi organization. And when war breaks out, the Stasi start their campaign of terror in Croatia. And because Croatia is ultra-Nazi and nationalist, it is allowed to be more or less self-governing by the Nazi authorities. And Pavelic is made premier of Croatia in 1941. That suited the Germans because they could then turn their attention to clamping down on the rest of Yugoslavia. They hadn't got to worry about Croatia. That was being looked after very well by the Stasi. And Pavelic, as you can see there, was responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 prisoners in concentration camps. That's the lowest estimate. There are much higher estimates. Several thousand Serbs, thousands of gypsies, thousands of Jews, and the confiscation of their property. And they were not gassed in gas chambers. They were not, mostly not shot. Most of them were knifed to death or hit over the head or pushed off a cliff. Now, Jelic's imprisonment and hijacking, if you like, by the British rather worries the Foreign Office, having second thoughts. So in 1940, Sir Patrick Dean, who would later become the ambassador for the United Nations, Britain's ambassador, but at the time he was advising the Foreign Office, he lays out the case. So it could be said that Jelic is leader, at least temporarily, of the Croat terrorist movement. That was because when Pavelic was imprisoned for a time by the Italians before World War II, Jelic takes on the responsibility for organizing the Stasi movement, keeping in contact with those that are overseas, bankrolling it, and so on. And there are Stasi training camps in Italy. And so, as you can see at the bottom there, that Patrick Dean comes to the conclusion that it would be very, very easy to destabilize Yugoslavia from Germany or wherever, and help prepare a civil war in Yugoslavia. So this is the fate of Romanis at the hands of the Stasi. The guy on the left, I think, is probably about to be knifed with a bayonet. One more. Here's a rather bleak picture of people shot in their own house. There are much, much worse pictures. So Jelic, after 6 months in, just under 6 months in Gibraltar, and the British decide that they have got a case against him, they'll bring him over to England. So he, first of all, he's interned along with a lot of other people in World War II. We'll come to that in a moment. And first of all, he goes to what's called the winter quarters at Ascot. And the winter quarters at Ascot, you have to bear in mind that by the mid-1940s, there's 1,000 internees and the number is becoming a bit of a problem. So fascists, Nazis, and high-profile political prisoners, also civilians that are of a foreign, German nationality that are sort of stuck here, are also temporarily detained as well. And he goes to this winter quarters at Ascot, and it's actually the winter quarters of Bertram Mills Circus. So this is how strapped they were, the British authorities, for accommodation, because they filled all of the prisons with the most dangerous ones, possible internees, but they then needed to put the rest, the other 1,000, into camps. He goes to the oratory school, which I think has been rebuilt, and it's actually, this one is in, I think, near Caversham. There's more than one oratory school. And MI5 plays a stool pigeon in with Jellic in his barrack room, if you like. And the stool pigeon is Croatian himself, and he's a merchant seaman, and he is obviously against this nationalist tendency, this Nazi tendency of the Ostasi and some of the Croatians. The majority of the Croatians were against it. That's why the terror had to be brought in. And Jellic tries to recruit him. And Jellic, when he gets used to him after some days or weeks, Jellic says that he has met Hitler repeatedly. And then he goes on to say that he believed in ethnic cleansing. And he says, if one could murder in Serbia, this is the Bosnian part as well, all the insane and the Jews, one could attach Serbia to Croatia, because Serbia and Croatia, they were all a Slav nation, but the Croatians thought they were infinitely superior to the more peasant Serbians. The plant, the stool pigeon, considers Jellic not to be normal, because Jellic has got this mania for the study of philology, which is the history of language. And Jellic believes that by examining the language of Croatia, the Croats, they were the first people in Europe to rise above the primitive state. And even the very name Crete is derived from the Croatian word krita or kroata, meaning roof. So these were the first people with a roof over their head. So no wonder that the stool pigeon thought that the Jellic was slightly wacky. Then he's still there in 1943, a letter from the Home Office to internment camp in Douglas, Isle of Man. Jellic, is an extremely clever man, good at dissimulation, and one of the most important political prisoners that we hold. You might be interested to know that most of the, well, at least half of the detainees in the internment camps were released in 1943. So that left 500. Most were released after 1944. There were 11 left towards the end of the war. Jellic was the last man to be released in December 1945. Now, there's a femme fatale here. Her name is Marguerite Slezak, opera singer. Her father was a famous opera singer. Her brother was an opera singer. She was also a B-picture movie star. So you can Google Margaret Slezak and you can see the kind of film she was in. She was a friend of Jellic when he was operating his medical practice in Berlin. She was a close companion of Hitler and Himmler. In fact, she was thought to be Himmler's mistress. She was a known German agent, and she was a go-between between Jellic and Nazi Germany before and after he was interned. So here we have the internment camp. After Ascot, and the Bertram Mills Circus. Jellick was moved to Liverpool to what was a half-built council development, and that didn't last long. So then the government decided that would introduce internment camps on the Isle of Man. And a lot of the hotels in Douglas and elsewhere, those in the left-hand picture you can see, were requisitioned for internees. And I think depending on how serious you were considered by the Home Office as a risk, you were perhaps in a low risk area, you could go to the cinema. Perhaps if you were a higher risk, then you were certainly watched more carefully. And there you can see on the right, actual camps had been built at Peel in the Isle of Man. Life was made as relaxed as possible because they were interned. They hadn't been tried. They were just considered a threat. Now, this is where we start to join up some of those disparate connections that we had at the beginning. When Jellick is at the Isle of Man in Peveril Camp, he befriends Quentin Joyce. Quentin Joyce is the camp welfare officer. He's a personable young man. He goes around seeing what the problems are and so on. But bear in mind, Quentin Joyce is an out Nazi. And he's obviously tells Jellick about the Toxoa Hotel run by Stuart Cole, a fellow Nazi who's been manager of the Toxoa Hotel since 1936, which was just before the Nazi Party was formed by William Joyce, Lord Haw Haw, Quentin's brother. And you can see that there's a reproduced voucher for a canteen voucher for £1. So the inmates or internees were allowed, they were allowed a certain amount of money. It was not like a prison camp. It was relaxed as soon as possible, as much as possible. And as I said, he was the last person to be released from internment. And he moves to the Toxoa Hotel with a fellow detainee called Albin Schmidt and Albin Schmidt's wife. Now, Albin Schmidt was Czech, and he was a known German agent in World War II. In 1946, Schmidt becomes the manager. Stuart Cole retires or leaves, and Schmidt, the Czech enemy agent, becomes manager of the hotel on Dulwich Common. So Jellick and Schmidt form a trading company, the Overseas and Continental Industrial Agency Limited. And if you remember your John le Carre and things, one of the, for example, is it the spy, not the spy that came in from the cold, but one of the later ones where George Smiley is involved, the office at the circus, at Cambridge Circus, has a name which is very, very similar to the Overseas and Continental Industrial Agency Limited. And they go through that door in the Le Carre novel into the office behind, which of course is MI6. So Jellick's in contact with lots of, although he promises not to be, as Quentin Joyce promises not to be, in contact with loads and loads of fascists, British fascists. And we're going to go on to some of those in a moment. But he's also in close contact with a man called Bruno Dragonovic. And this is a Roman Catholic priest. And he's in the College of St. Jerome in Rome. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Ustasi, and he was organizing the escape route to get the Ustasi members that had survived the war gone into hiding. He was trying to extricate them and locate them in Argentina through the granting of identity cards from the issued by the Red Cross to the Vatican. He was in constant correspondence with Jellick. I'm just going to read to you a little piece here that this priest wrote. I've been in contact with Ustazi contacts in South America. Sorry, that's the wrong piece. This is what he wrote in April the 5th, 1947. 20 of our people have been arrested, some of them in the street. 9 were arrested in Genoa, and the last thing is some of them being arrested in Naples. They're looking for more people to arrest in Rome. And I've been given advice with a friendly quarter to take care, because all those gentlemen are keeping an exceedingly watchful eye upon me. And also Peter Capron, the Franciscan. So he was in league with Jellick, getting these Ustazi members, those that survived, out of Europe and into South America. And here is the College of San Jerome, where he operated and where he hid a lot of these Ustazi members. Jellick, as I said, had close contact with a number of high-profile fascists while he's living at the Toxoa Hotel. And one of them is Admiral Sir Barry Domville. Domville was head of British naval intelligence before the war. He was an admiral in the First World War, commanded cruisers and so on, became head of British naval intelligence, but was an out-and-out Nazi and was invited by Hitler to the Nuremberg, to the games and the rallies. And so he was arrested at the outbreak of World War II and spent the war in Brixton jail. But after the war, when he's released, he is a frequent member, a visitor rather, to the Toxoa and in contact with him a lot. Jellick has to report to the police every week. Well, that was not a hardship from the Toxoa Hotel. He only had to walk a few hundred yards down the road to West Dulwich Police Station, which was right next to West Dulwich Station. So these rat lines that Jellick was organising, he was organising them through 2 different bodies, if you like. One was this Overseas and Continental Industrial Agency, which was, to all intents and purposes, the one that was running the concrete railway sleepers I spoke of earlier. And the second one, he sets up a committee for the protection and welfare of Croatian refugees. So he's got these 2 bodies working, but both of them, according to Kim Philby, the very Kim Philby that's the 4th man, at the time he's at MI6, these are actual conduits, these are fundraisers, connections to get these Ustazi members out of into South America. The final debriefing is this. Jellick plans to publish this monumental book. So this is, he has not given up on his study of language being historical connection with how brilliant and educated and so on the Croatians were. He was going to publish it. In July 1947, he's still at the Toxoa Hotel. As you can see, Jellick denies any active participation in the assassination of King Alexander in 1934, but admits a close association. The agent states that this man is a thug, a highly intelligent and ruthless one at that, is not open to doubt. And he's still meeting and corresponding with Quentin Joyce, all these fascists and proto-Nazis. Well, he's becoming an embarrassment as well, because MI6 have got to translate dozens and dozens of letters that Jellic's sending all over the world in various languages, mostly, I suppose, in Serbo-Croat. And they've got a lot of other things on their mind. And the situation in Yugoslavia is now that because of the communists, Tito's communist activism in Yugoslavia, the Allies are not so welcoming to Yugoslavia as they were. They've changed round. That's why, changed sides, I suppose you might say. That's why that priest who you saw a moment ago was actually employed later by the CIA for their own purposes. So what they wanted to do really is to get rid of Jellic. Jellic, incidentally, had taken a lawsuit out for wrongful arrest as well. And so that was another factor. So when Jellic decides to go to Berlin on the 2nd of May, 1949, the Foreign Office, Home Office say he will not be allowed to land again in the UK. So he goes. Then you can see in 1950, he's reported to be in South America or Spain, still being watched by British intelligence. And in the early 1970s, there are 2 Yugoslav assassination attempts on him in West Berlin by trying to bomb his apartment. And he dies, in fact, of suspected poisoning. But of course, his dreams of an independent Croatia were realized with, I think, the Dayton Accord. And so when Yugoslavia sort of broke up with Tito's death, then Croatia became independent. But of course, then you will realize and remember in the 1990s and 1980s, the Balkan War and the Bosnian War erupted again. So between the same Serbs and Croats, again, there was the same kind of warfare. So what happened to the Toksoa Hotel? Well, in 1948, the hotel lease was given up, and King's College Hospital showed interest and wanted it as a nurse's home. And it was a nurse's home until I think it was about 1976. So from 48 to 76, guys were there for a while. Then it went into extreme dilapidation. The hospital was only paying a peppercorn rent on it, £230 a year or something really, really minimal. But they didn't pay any repair work at the end of the lease. They just handed it over. And this coincided with Barratt Homes wanting to build a development on Dulwich Common. And so the Toksoa Hotel was demolished. It had become Hambledon House for the nurses' home, but it was the same building. That was demolished. It was in a bad state. And Barratt Homes was built the estate we now know. And one of the first people to go in there, they apparently at a advantageous price, was Dennis and Margaret Thatcher. And when Margaret Thatcher lost her position as Prime Minister, then she said the famous words, well, we exchanged number 10 for number 11, meaning number 11, Hambledon Place. And there we end the saga of the hotel at Spy Corner. Thank you very much.